A father guns down seven of his own kids, eight in total, shoots two other women, and everybody's wondering what's going on. Were there any signs beforehand? And if so, what were they? Was he dealing with any issues? And what could drive a man to commit such a horrendous act, especially to his own children? We'll discuss this and more on today's episode. So what I want to jump right into the content, right into the video. And near the end, we'll wrap all this up and we'll discuss this as to were there any telltale signs? How can you or I protect ourselves in situations similar when there are signs? And how do we understand the issue of evil, especially when it's on such a grand scale as Christians? We'll discuss all this and more. So let's jump right into the content today. Thank you for joining me.
8 children have been killed in one of the deadliest mass shootings in the US in over 2 years. And today, police answered questions, providing a detailed timeline of the incident. So let's break it down. The shooting unfolded early Sunday morning in Shreveport, Louisiana, where police say 32-year-old Shamar Elkins shot 8 children, 7 of them being his own. Officials are calling the incident a domestic violence-related attack tied to a marital separation. Authorities say that all 8 children were found dead with gunshot wounds, and 2 women, including his wife Shaniqua Elkins, were also shot, but are now hospitalized in critical condition.
I hear that the other woman was the mom of some of his other kids.
Domestic violence is not a private issue. It's not a family issue. It is a community issue. And when we fail to respond in a coordinated, consistent, and compassionate way, people die.
And this is how police said the incident started.
About 5:55 a.m. on Sunday morning, Shreveport police received the first call. The caller stated that they were on top of a house. The suspect was inside and that a male had been shot.
And within minutes, a second call came in, this time from another home, where a woman said she had been shot and her 3 children were taken. Police quickly connected both scenes.
Dispatch linked the Harrison Street shooting with the shooting on West 79th Street and that they all were related.
And as a note, we're breaking down the full timeline and what led up to this moment in our longer investigative breakdown linked to our channel, so make sure to check that out. But by 6:15 a.m., Elkins had carjacked a vehicle and fled the area, triggering a multi-agency pursuit, including local and state police. The chase ended in an exchange of gunfire where Elkins was killed. Police are still investigating whether his death was self-inflicted or a result of gunfire exchanges. But soon after, officers discovered multiple children dead inside the homes where the shootings took place. The victims included 3 boys and 5 girls, ranging from ages 3 to 11 years old. Police say that both a child and an adult escaped by jumping from the roof and are now in stable condition.
I'm really trying to wrap my mind around this whole thing, this entire tragedy, like truly. And we'll discuss more about Elkins and go into more detail as to who he was and what his motivations could have possibly been. But the idea of believing that you're suffering to that degree, and I do understand that mental health is a really serious thing. As a police officer, corrections officer, I dealt with that on a daily basis, pretty much my entire career. And I do understand how far off the deep end people can go. But so far, it doesn't sound as if he was dealing with it to that extent. I mean, well, obviously there was something going on for him to be able to do this level of evil to his own children. But it seemed like the everyday his everyday actions, as so far what we've heard, it doesn't seem like it was anything that evident. But to go like to flip the script, to flip the switch and go to that extreme, This is just really like boggling and blowing my mind.
Authorities say that Elkins used an assault-style weapon, though the caliber and where he got the weapon is still under investigation, and he was previously found in police records, though officials have not clarified for what. Police also say that both women had relationships with Elkins, but investigators are still working to determine family connections among the children.
We'll be going into a bit more detail after this video.
But family members say that the couple was in the middle of a separation and scheduled to appear in court the next day. Officials say there were no known prior domestic violence cases, but are now examining broader warning signs. And now, as the investigation continues, a community is left in mourning and confronting how domestic violence can escalate into mass tragedy when warning signs go unaddressed. For more context and analysis, follow and watch our full breakdown at thenationaldesk.com.
Yeah, really wild. I'll probably say that 1,000 times throughout the course of this video because it's just that insane to me for a man to go, or anyone, because you hear about moms going through postpartum depression and doing similar things. You really have to wonder if there's way more going on, demonic even, possibly. Let's watch this other video that goes into a bit more detail as well.
Sunday. Shamar, I've got new details about the possible motive in the murder of 8 children in Shreveport, Louisiana, early Sunday. Shamar Elkins, who massacred 7 of his children as well as another child, a cousin, was set to battle his estranged wife in divorce court on Monday, as in yesterday. The New York Times reported that he called his mother and stepfather on Easter to tell them his wife of 2 years had filed for divorce, that he wanted to end his life, and was drowning in, quote, dark thoughts. His weekend rampage not only killed 8 innocent children, 7 of them his, he also injured his wife as well as a woman believed to be his girlfriend. Despite the carnage, remarkably, 1 child escaped. The Post deputy.
What do you have to believe? I'm talking like spiritual, on a spiritual level. What has to be going through your heart and mind? I'm talking about a sane, quote unquote, sane person. Obviously, you're not completely sane to be able to commit this level of evil, but what has to be going through your mind? Trust me, as a person who's been through divorce, who's had their kids taken, from their spouse in during the divorce process and basically losing everything, I understand a high level of frustration and anger. I get that. I think that's normal. I think most men, because men typically lose out in these issues when it comes to divorces and custody battles. So I get the frustration, but to turn around and say, okay, well, I'm just going to take out all my children and then try to take you out as well, that's insane.
Managing editor Michael Zenny told me just what happened.
So we are still trying to figure out all of the exact details of what happened during this horrific massacre, but it does seem that 2 of the kids tried to escape out of a window with the help of one of the adults in the home. One of the kids jumped off the roof and actually broke his leg. He is, we believe right now, the sole child who has survived these horrible, horrible shooting.
And just think about what that child is going to have to go through the rest of their life. Just surviving your father. I believe it's one of his children. I'm not sure if it was one of the cousins or another kid. But just think about the trauma that child will have to endure the rest of their life. Very sad.
There was another child who was trying to escape and was actually gunned down and killed. The reporting on this has been absolutely devastating. This is one of those stories like Uvalde, like Sandy Hook, that's going to stay with everybody who's working it. But factually, some of the things that we've learned, one, the father had a previous gun charge, and so was.
We'll talk about that a bit more.
It looks like he was likely barred from owning a firearm. We still don't know how he got the gun.
And this is another thing I want to mention really quick. When we talk about gun rights and all the arguments you hear when it comes to guns. Let's create more laws to keep bad people from committing crimes, committing gun crimes. And that's the problem, that the people who are big on the gun control crowd is that, do you honestly believe that those who have the mindset to do evil will abide by the law? Like, really? That does that make any sense whatsoever? You can put all, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any kind of laws, but most of the time the issues we're dealing with are the fact that many of the laws aren't even put into practice. So what we're going to do is just add more laws, which ultimately end up punishing the good people, the people who want to do good, who simply want to protect themselves, protect their families. And here's a prime example. This already had previous charges. And again, we'll talk about some of those here shortly. But I know there's going to be more talk over the next coming days and weeks about more gun control measures. But we have to ask ourselves, would this have truly stopped him? Would this have truly stopped a person who was that hell bent on destruction? I think when you get to that level of extremes, you'll do whatever. You'll do anything. Anything. Nothing will stop you. And even if you took away a gun, who knows what other means he could have used to try to end his kids' lives. Let's continue.
Or what came about with that. The other thing is, it seems pretty clear that there was some sort of ongoing mental break, possibly connected to a divorce. So he was actually due in court the day after the shooting, related to the divorce of his estranged wife, who is the mother of at least 5 of the kids who were killed. This is the other thing is, he told a stepfather and relatives that he had demons, and some demons you don't come back from. This is all sort of indicating, from what we can tell, someone who is increasingly troubled. That still does not really explain, though, why this all happened at this time, and we're going to continue to look for those answers.
It definitely doesn't explain it, but it kind of gives some semblance of, or some hints as to at least the state of mind that he was in just prior to this incident. So let's move on. So, and let's look at some of the details of what his family said about him and things that he shared with his family prior to this event. I appreciate y'all for stopping by. This isn't necessarily one of these conversations I was looking forward to have. When I first heard this was absolutely heartbreaking. But I feel that there's benefit in having these hard conversations. Things can be learned as we deal with these crappy topics. Hopefully, Lord willing, you'll never find yourself in a similar situation. But we'll read some of the details that USA Today reported on. Family shares more details about Louisiana man who killed 8 kids. In the wake of a mass shooting that left 8 children gone and 2 women fighting for their lives in Louisiana, their loved ones are sharing more about what led up to the tragedy that has shattered their family and community. I pray that these people are connected, that they have they have family, the kids, like the surviving kids, the surviving women. I pray that the community will come around them and to do the best they can to help them deal with this tragic event. Quote, I really can't believe it. Francisco Monroe Brown, a relative, told USA Today. The Pews are a gospel church going family, a singing family. And this also points to the fact that attending church, and I don't dare to speak on every part of their lives. I don't know, but it can demonstrate that being in church doesn't necessarily or doesn't automatically equate to a righteous life. And I'm not trying to throw any shade on the entire family, but clearly this man was dealing with some serious demons, no doubt about it. But oftentimes people can go to church, and maybe he was seeking some semblance of guidance. God only knows. I'm sure we'll get more and more as time goes on. But even this article, I just read a little bit of it, but I kind of want to read it with y'all together so we can get a better understanding of who he was. Interviews by USA Today and other news outlets with family members of the shooting suspect, Shamar Elkins, and some of the victims revealed that while the children appeared to be doing well and excelling in school, their father may have been plagued with quote unquote dark thoughts. Clearly, Brown, the cousin of Elkins' wife, recalled how Elkins recently took the kids to church. He says, and they were dressed so cute, all dressed alike, Brown said. The Pugh family is a happy family, a joyous family. I'm not sure what happened. I'm asking the nation for prayer for the kids and the Elkins family, and they'll definitely get mine. And I encourage my brothers and sisters in Christ to do the same for this family. And it's something that just popped in my mind. I'm gonna see if there's even some type of fund or something like that we can donate to. Here's what to know about the rampage that left 8 children dead. What do we know about Elkins? Shreveport officials have described the shooting on April 19th as domestic violence, saying Elkins shot the mother of his children and another woman, which was what I was able to gather was another mother to some of his other children, as well as his 7 children and one of their cousins. Court records show Elkins married Shaniqua Pugh in April 2024. Another woman, Christina Snow, sued Elkins for child support and was granted joint custody of their child, Soraya, in 2017. Court records show Soraya, 11, was among those. I'm changing the words because I know how YouTube is. One of those ones whose lives were lost in the shooting. Elkins served in the Louisiana Army National Guard from 2013 to 2020 as a signal system specialist and a fire support specialist, an Army official told USA Today. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about him having PTSD or something along those lines. So when I heard that he was a National Guardsman, I automatically figured that he had been deployed. I just assumed that to be the case. But here we see, and I just hit it with a highlight, he was never deployed. At the time of the shooting, he was working for the UPS, United Parcel Service, the company confirmed. So this doesn't mean that someone couldn't be suffering from PTSD from other traumatic events that took place in their life. Who knows? We're just trying to piece the pieces together, y'all. That's what we're trying to do. He had previously pled guilty to illegal use of weapons and received probation, court records show. We'll talk about that as well. Family members spoke to news outlets to share more about Elkins' mental state. And I think this is what everybody really wants to know. Elkins and his wife were in the process of separating and were set to appear in court on April 20th. Yeah, just yesterday. The day, that was the day before the shooting. Or the day after, my bad. The day after the shooting, Crystal Brown, a cousin of one of the women who was wounded in the shooting, told the Associated Press. Elkins' stepfather, Marcus Jackson, told the New York Times that his stepson said during a call on Easter Sunday that his wife wanted a divorce. Elkins said that he wanted to take his own life and that he was dealing with dark thoughts, Jackson told the newspaper. Terrible. You know, I'm not, I don't like tragedy at all, but sadly, it's a part of this world. But in a situation like this, you have to wonder, or at least I wonder. I don't want to put my thoughts on anybody else. Why didn't he just take his own life? That would have been tragic enough and traumatic for the children and the family, but not like this. Like this right here was insane. Absolutely insane. And so unnecessary. If you're that depressed and that sad and that traumatized, why bring harm on everybody? And then by taking the life of these harmless, innocent kids. Anyway, let's continue. Quote, he says, I told Elkin, you can beat stuff, man. I don't care what you're going through. You can beat it. Jackson told the outlet. Then I remember him telling me, some people don't come back from their demons. And it's so wild. Like, what do you do when you hear someone talking like that? A lot of times people talk pretty, say some crazy things, but I'm pretty sure, unless he went into more detail, I'm pretty sure that his cousin here, I think it was his cousin, his stepfather, never had that he had that capacity within him. And just out of respect for the lost children, I want to mention who they were. Who were the 8 children? The Caddo Parish Coroner's Office identified the 8 children in the April 19th shooting. 7 of the children were Elkins and 1 was a cousin. Officials said the children were Jayla Elkins, 3, Shayla Elkins, 5, Kayla Pugh, 6, Layla Pugh, 7, Marcaden Pugh, 10, Soraya Snow, 11, Kadarian Snow, 6, Braylon Snow, 5. This is so heartbreaking. Community mourns children slain at candlelight vigil. Well, yeah, let's move on here. I want to get into some more of the details. And my heart and prayer goes out to the family and friends, because you can imagine, I saw an article where people were talking about some of the children at the local school, preschool and kindergarten, all the way up through elementary, and I think maybe even up to, I think even up to middle school. Yeah, 11-year-old. So it's like, it's how do you explain that to a little kid that one of their friends was taken in such a tragic way? How do you explain that to a 6-year-old kid or a 7-year-old kid that his classmate, maybe his best friend or her best friend, is gone, is dead? How the Louisiana mass shooting unfolded. We heard a bit of the timeline, but we'll go through it real quick. Just a summary. Authorities said the shooting rampage unfolded at 2 homes in Shreveport. At the first home, a woman and her child fled to the roof, and the mother called 911. Shreveport Police Chief Wayne Smith said the 2 jumped from the roof to escape, and the child was injured. Obviously, that's the child who broke their leg. Elkins shot everyone inside the house, the caller said. The caller told the police at 5:58 a.m., adding that there were 9 people living there. Minutes later, 9 in one home, sheesh. Minutes later, another call came in from a woman who said her boyfriend shot her and had taken her 3 children. After the shooting, Elkins stole a car at gunpoint, and officers followed him to Bossier City, where they exchanged gunfire. Elkins was pronounced dead, but it remains under investigation, as the video said, whether he was shot by the police or shot himself. The injured victims from the second house and no children were found in the car with Elkins. In all, 8 children were killed in the shooting. 2 women, including Elkins' wife, were seriously injured by gunfire. 1 child was injured escaping off a roof. And I believe I'm hearing them say that one of the adults, one of the women, suffered injuries, and is expected to survive, but the other one is still going through surgeries, and her condition is a bit more in question. Wow. All right, let's talk a bit about Elkin because his background, you naturally assume or wonder who was this guy and did he have a criminal record? Before we do that, let me respond to some of these chats. I appreciate y'all joining me, everybody who's here. It seems he also had deep abandonment issues. You think, definitely. This is another example of why having healthy fathers in our lives are so important. Amen, Michelle. That it's so true. We hear all the statistics, and who knows what his life was like. I'm really curious when we have these really horrendous and tragic events. And I know nowadays you're having more and more outlets not report the name of the killer, the shooter, and I think that does a disservice. And I understand where their heart is; they don't want these guys getting celebrated or glorified. You're going to have that happen anyway, whether the person is identified or not. But I think it's good to identify these people as we do, and so we can do a deeper dive and figure out who they were and if there were any signs that were in his life. Acting like that person is unnamed. And again, I respect and I understand the sentiment, but I just think it's kind of silly, personally. Let's find out who this guy is. Let's see if there was any evidence in his past, so we can better prepare and be better prepared for similar situations. Maybe there's signs. And it's hard in this day and age where everyone is portrayed as a victim. It's hard to really examine that because you have so many other folks who have this mindset that looking into someone's background and finding problems and saying, hey, this might be signs of potential issues down the road. Fatherlessness is not politically correct. I personally don't care, to be honest with you, because I think there's too much documented evidence for us to ignore the negative, the damning impact of fatherlessness. Even if it's sometimes a father can be in the home, but as Michelle said so perfectly, it doesn't automatically equate to a healthy situation. Clearly, I guarantee you, I can almost guarantee you. I never want to make absolute statements when we're dealing with unknowns, but I can almost guarantee you that there were signs. There were many, many signs, not just him making statements. I'll put money on it that there's been domestic abuse in that home, and that this wasn't the first incident where he lost it. I'm willing to put money on it because I've seen it 1,000 times. He expressed self-harm to his mom in weeks before. She told him he could get through these feelings, but she never imagined that he would harm his children. Wow. I bet you in that household, you talk to the girlfriends or the wife, and you'll see a whole lot more. It'll come out. It's just a matter of time. It'll come out. All right, let's move on to the next article. Trust me, y'all, I'd much rather be talking about something else, but I think there's too much there. I think there's a lot to be gained from studying this entire topic, this whole situation. I think there's a lot that we can learn from it. Let me know if y'all can see this here. Hold on, let me make it a little bigger. There we go. Criminal history of Shreveport man who shot and killed 8 children, revealed. This isn't too lengthy. I was actually shocked that there wasn't more, but let's read it out. The Caddo Parish District Attorney Office, CDPAO, released a statement today, April 20th, regarding the criminal history of the man who took his kids' lives. CPDAO claims Shamar Elkins, the shooter, has a past Caddo Parish conviction from 2019 for the illegal use of a firearm. They said this event stemmed from a confrontation with another man in which self-defense claims could not be disproven, but I guess it couldn't be proven either. The accident happened near a school between where Elkins lived at the time. According to the CPCOC, Caddo Parish Clerk of Court, Elkins was initially sentenced to 1 year of hard labor for illegal use of weapons or dangerous instrumentalities, but the judge suspended the sentence and placed him on 18 months probation. I wonder what the details were in this situation, which he completed. So he finished the probation, I'm assuming, without any incident. His charge of carrying a firearm, a dangerous weapon by a non-student at a school, was dismissed. So he was in the vicinity of a school, it sounds like. It doesn't sound like he actually had one at the school, but I could be wrong. There have been no reported interaction with law enforcement or courts since then from Elkins. Elkins' only other conviction is a misdemeanor 2015 DWI conviction, his first offense. He was charged with driving while intoxicated and failure to yield to emergency vehicle. He served probation for those offenses. Elkins was ordered to perform 48 days of community service, $60 per month to the probation department. Seemed like there was no issues there. CPDAO said the information gathered thus far indicates that the event was domestic violence related, involving significant mental health factors. Are they talking about this event or because clearly the event with him killing his kids, obviously there was some domestic violence relation, but it says significant. It also involves significant mental health factors, including reported post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm really curious as to getting more information about this. I want to know where does the PTSD come into play? Something that happened to him as a kid, as an adult, because it clearly doesn't seem as if it had anything to do with his military service. Who knows, but him not being deployed is a big sign. They're going to say the shooting was under investigation. They also say it's unacceptable to politicize this tragedy, which continues to impact the entire community. Instead, we are called upon to pledge serious collective commitment to addressing domestic violence and mental health in our community. But of course, it's going to be politicized. That's just what folks do. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Talking about the political ramifications of violence is a good thing. I'm always talking about, and I don't know what this district is like, if it's like a more conservative leaning location or not. But I'm always talking about how there's some places that are softer on crime. Now, does this fall into that situation? Perhaps. They did give him probation, but he finished it and seemed as if there wasn't any issue at the time. But Lord only knows what was going on at the home front. So I don't know if that even applies here, but it's okay. I think it's okay to ask these questions. I think it's okay to ask certain questions when it comes down to, from a political standpoint, how do we make people safer? How does the government, because that's their primary function in my mind. I think the government has been given too much responsibility when it comes to the average everyday citizen. But I think it's consistent and biblical, Romans chapter 13, for instance, that the government is there to protect people from evil, protect their citizens from evil. And when a government refuses or chooses not to do that, and we have a major issue, clearly. All right. Let's talk a little bit about, all right. I want to share this right here. When it talks about him, and y'all know I hate CNN. If any of y'all been here for any length of time, but I thought that this article, from the headline, and I've only got a little bit of it, but they go into a bit more detail about what the other family members said they saw or heard. And let's see if there's anything different from what we heard already. Freddie Montgomery looked across the street as he walked home from visiting a neighbor and saw Shamar Elkins. The 31-year-old was sitting on the front porch of his Shreveport, Louisiana home Saturday afternoon, just a day before the event. Montgomery told CNN the two men waved at each other as children played in the yard. Montgomery woke up and opened the curtains. The next morning, he saw law enforcement entering the house across the street, and the police presence continued to grow. He asked an officer if the scene was bad. The police said yes. Are we talking fatalities? Montgomery asked. Multiple, the officer said. Loss of children? Montgomery asked. Multiple, the officer said. My goodness. I mean, this whole situation just breaks my heart. Now I'm going to move down to where they just talk about his mindset. A little bit of detail here. This is kind of interesting. Someone reports that Arsenault described the scene in the city of just over 180,000 people, and it's a small city, at least from my perspective. This kind of shooting rattles the entire city, the mayor said. Early morning broken by gunfire. There's a picture of Elkins and his wife. It sounds like there was some infidelity going on, because we're hearing there was a divorce pending, and one woman said her boyfriend. So it sounds like there was some cheating going on, which only added to all the tension. That might have been the reason for the filed divorce. We went to the timeline. Okay, here we go. Help me guard my mind and my emotions. 4 days after posting the Easter picture of his family, he reposted an inspirational prayer from another Facebook page that began, Dear God, today I ask you to help me guard my mind and my emotions. The prayer also asked for strength to reject depression, anger, anxiety, and panic. This might be what you were talking about, Michelle. He had previously struggled with mental health issues, multiple family members told CNN. Now, Elkins and his wife, 34-year-old Shaniqua Pugh, were in the process of divorcing. She filed for divorce for infidelity. Bingo. Troy Brown, Elkins' brother-in-law, said. It seems like he was having a hard time. The woman who raised Elkins, but was not his biological mother, told New York Times he tried to take his own life in February. And here's another picture of him and his kids. Doesn't make any sense, y'all. Seriously. Elkins, who was in the Louisiana Army National Guard as a signal support specialist and fire support specialist, had recently stayed at the local VA to get treatment for mental health issues. So he actually went there and actually got inpatient help. Brown's cousin, Crystal Brown Page, told CNN. He came home happy, Brown said. He loved his kids. Everything had felt like it was falling apart for Elkins, Brown said. I would constantly talk to my brother-in-law. Let's sit outside. Let's play dominoes. Let's play cards. Let's go for a walk, Brown said. Brown asked if Elkins needed to go back to the hospital, but Elkins allegedly told him he was okay. I'm just gonna deal with it. Brown recalled him saying, I wish he went ahead and got the help. Yeah, we all feel like that. Elkins and Pugh were supposed to go to court Monday to sign the divorce papers. Pugh had considered leaving Elkins before they were married. The New York Post reported. He had told Pugh, the New York Times reported, he would kill her, their kids, and himself if she did. Oh, okay, so she talked about divorcing him before or leaving him before, and it's alleged that he said that he would end all their lives. Wow. Clearly, there were signs. There were clear signs that this man was not right early on. And it says before they were married, so they had multiple kids prior to that. Brown Elkins, prior to their marriage, Brown Elkins' brother-in-law said his daughter, the 12-year-old who jumped from the roof, just had some scratches from Sunday's attack. His wife, Pugh's sister, fractured bones from falling off the roof, but his son died in the massacre. I'm never going to go get to throw the football with him again, Brown said in tears. Quote, these were 8 babies, precious babies that I took care of, helped take care of, helped raise on a daily basis. Brown said, I've lost 8 parts of me because I loved each and every one of them like they were my own and took care of them like they were my own. It goes on to say, this is the result when someone snaps. By Monday, a memorial filled with flowers and balloons and stuffed animals could be seen in front of the family's home, where community members trickled in and out throughout the day. Let me get to the point to where he talks about. Okay, here we go. City Council member Tabitha Taylor broke down in tears Sunday and asked people to make better use of resources to address mental health challenges. Quote, this is not a freaking joke. This is real. And this is a result when someone snaps, said Taylor. She told CNN's Phil Mattingly domestic violence in her community is staggering, with 30% of homicides being related to domestic violence, adding to the growing group of women affected are African American. And so when we talk about the issue of domestic violence, just from a law enforcement perspective, we know that that is one of the most dangerous calls that you can go on. They always say vehicle stops and domestic violence calls are the most dangerous police actions, the most dangerous encounters a police officer can be on, potentially. And why is that? Well, vehicle stop, you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know who you stopped. But when it comes down to a domestic violence, there's so much emotion involved. People fly off the hinges, fly off the handle. They totally lose it. Investigators, let me get back to the previous view so we can see that. Y'all can see it. Investigators will determine whether this was a case of family annihilation. I've never heard of that before. Not in that exact term. A deliberate attempt to wipe out one's family all at once. Former FBI director and CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe said, I think the work to be done now is to go back and try to see those signs that were there for family members. I agree. For likely his spouse, for friends, for others. McCabe said, and work with the community on better understanding what steps to take when someone around you is spiraling into that sort of depression. And I think what's even more important in these situations is and I know it's hard because I've had countless conversations with women who have been victimized in violent relationships, and even men who are in violent relationships, and a lot of times they can't seem to let go and they can't seem to move on. But I've seen a lot of these types of calls where you have people, repeat offenders, multiple domestic violence calls dealing with the same couple time and time again. And common sense would tell them or would tell you that you should leave and move on. But I don't know. A lot of the women oftentimes are in denial. They really don't want to accept the reality of it being that bad. And I've seen this happen not just to average everyday women in the community. I've seen this happen with women who were in law enforcement. I've had friends, close friends, who I knew who were corrections officers or police officers who were the victims of domestic violence, but you would never know it by the way they acted when they came to work. And some women just didn't want to look like failures in their relationships, so they stuck around when they were getting their butts kicked. And others just didn't want people to look at them like negatively for being in a relationship like that. So they kept it to themselves. I mean, it's really tragic, and there's way more, we can go way deeper when it comes to the psychology of individuals who are involved in these types of violent relationships. And what's the trigger point for a guy, for the man who's in these types of relationships? Now, let me check out another post here, another chat. So he had a history of misusing firearms, but was still able to possess one. It is Louisiana. They have very low gun restrictions, so maybe that they let him off easy. And it's also maybe it was illegally obtained. Who knows? But you would hope, we would hope that with his record that he wouldn't be allowed to possess a firearm. I guess that's going to be something we're going to have to wait on. That's going to come out on the road. Now, the big question we often will ask in situations like this, you'll hear someone bring it up, is like a why God. Like, why would the Lord allow something so horrendous to take place? And I think that's a good question. I think some people ask that question from an honest heart, whereas other people ask that question more as a gotcha towards God, as in, this is why I don't believe, because they can't fathom why God would allow things like this to take place. So Christian apologist Wes Huff has a short clip where he touches on this issue. He doesn't go into, it's not a super deep video, but it's one that I think that addresses the issue, and he brings up a few points that I think would be really helpful for the person going through the tragedy, the skeptic, and for the Christian, that can help us maybe respond or think this through on a much deeper level. Let's check this out.
That is arguably the hardest and most pressing apologetic question there is, because ultimately the very tidy philosophical and theological answer isn't the right answer sometimes. Sometimes the right answer to the wrong question is the wrong answer. Because I've encountered situations where someone has brought up a variation of the problem of evil to me, and I've just felt uneasy about maybe the tenure that they're coming at with the question, kind of the character that maybe is behind the scenes, and asking them, that's a great question. Why are you asking that question in particular? And finding out, once again, like the previous question related to it, they're personally hurting. And so in that sense, I could give a tidy answer about, if you're positing that something is good, you're positing that there's an objective good and evil. And if there's an objective good and evil, then you're positing an objective law, and an objective law needs an objective lawgiver. So where do we find the groundwork for an objective lawgiver to begin with? Otherwise, you may not like certain things, but to say they ought not to happen is actually an ethical leap to an objective reality.
And I think that's a good point. And I think it's fitting based on certain situations that we're in. When the professing non-believer claims that there is no God, or God couldn't be good because he allows evil in the first place, the question to push back on them, if it's just a simple question and and I even think that even if they might be personally wrestling with certain issues, I still think it's a good question to ask them. Just as simple, well, based on what standard is that considered evil? Because if we deny if we are just products of time and chance acting on matter, we are nothing more than cosmic accidents. Our ancestors crawled out of the primordial ooze millions of years ago, and we are here with no intent. Nobody intended for us to be here. We're just here by happenstance. How does one come to the conclusion that anything is ultimately, I'm talking about not just beyond my personal opinion or beyond your personal opinion, how do we come to the conclusion that anything is morally good or evil on an ultimate sense, on a larger scale, apart from that's just how I feel about it? Because if there, as Wes just so perfectly put, if there is no ultimate lawgiver, some ultimate law that supervises and supersedes us as individuals, as humans, then as we're basically saying if there is no ultimate law, or if there is an ultimate law, there has to be an ultimate lawgiver. Because where do you get ultimates from cosmic accidents or from chance when it comes to morality? You really don't. And I've never heard a atheist give a solid answer for that. They're making assumptions based on a Christian worldview, a biblical perspective, or any perspective that believes in a transcendent reality. They're making assumptions that their worldview, they're having to borrow from a theistic, and particularly a Christian worldview, in order to be able to make the claim that anything is ultimately good. So I think that's a solid question to ask the non-believer and push back at them when they're having these conversations.
You may or may not have groundwork for. But if that person is struggling because a family member of theirs has cancer, then that particular maybe tidy, tied up in a nice bow answer is not going to speak to them whatsoever. And so that's why that's the hardest question, because there are actually very good answers to it. But often it doesn't speak to the person in front of you, because questions have questioners that sit behind them. And one of the pitfalls of my chosen field of ministry, apologetics, is that sometimes we give answers where we talk at people rather than with people, and there's a danger to that. Because the Christian faith isn't just an intellectual assent, right? It's a personal relationship. And that should also be played out in the answers that we give. So in one sense, I would say that I talk to a lot of people who go through that particular issue. And sometimes they assume that removing God from the equation is the answer, because they're wrestling with this good God, bad world. How do I put these two things together? Unfortunately, though, I think if you remove God from the picture, you're removing an essential component of even raising the objection to begin with. Like I said before, where are we getting these ideas that this is evil and that this other thing is good and that you should be doing situation B above situation A?
Right.
And ultimately, I think the Christian worldview is unique in that the God of the Bible is not it's not the God of deism who creates and just kind of lets the clockwork dials and switches go into place and looks from afar, viewing what's going on.
Make sure you pay attention to this. I think he really wraps this up beautifully.
But actually enters into the creation and experiences pain and suffering and uncertainty and ultimately murder. And so in that sense, the God of the Bible can truly identify with the person who is suffering, because the God of the Bible looks at us when we say, I don't get it. I'm hurting. God, what's going on? And he can say, I understand that. You don't like evil. Me neither. Look at what it did to my son. And there's an aspect of that which I don't think you can find in other worldview perspectives to the same degree.
Yeah, I thought that was very well stated. And there's so many other issues I think one thing that people really struggle with is the concept of God allowing evil. But I think when we read through the Bible and we understand the very character and nature of God, and we understand that ultimately he is love, but he's also just, and there are consequences for man's rebellion. And this is just one of many aspects, or one of many possible reasons of why God might allow evil into our lives. Because you look at, when you read through the Bible, when you see rebellious nations and God bringing justice on these rebellious nations, those are just one aspect. But if we look through the gospel, I think it's in John 6, off the top of my head. Correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe a little further than that. Let me pull it up while we're talking here. I have a Bible right here. My bad. I think it's in John 10, 6 or 10, where you have the man born blind. Where's that at, y'all? Is it 6 or 10? And the disciples ask him. John 9. Or somewhere in the middle. It says in John 9, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And that can be really hard for many of us to really deal with and understand. But there are difficult things that God can allow, difficult things into our lives for his ultimate purposes. And I think that's very consistent. And I think that those purposes can have a much greater good. And I'm not trying to belittle or minimize anybody's pain or minimize anybody's suffering. But who are we looking at? Who are we talking about? The attributes of the God of the Bible. He's all knowing, everywhere at once. He's good. He's loving. The scriptures say the compassionate and gracious God, abounding in love. Ultimately, and the fact that he demonstrates, those are just some of his attributes. The fact that he demonstrates those, just by pure definition, he is wiser and smarter than we are. He's always existed. So he doesn't necessarily have to grow in knowledge. Now, Jesus did in the incarnation. But as far as the spirit aspects of God, he doesn't grow in knowledge. He knows all. So looking to him, even when times are difficult, is such an amazing thing, because he can bring clarity to some pretty horrendous situations that we may find ourselves in, whether it's by our own choices or whether it's based on the fact that we are just living in a fallen world, or whether God has a specific plan in the process. He can use an evil event, as we look at the cross. He can use an evil event, the evil intentions of man, and he can bring about something beautiful, like we saw what happened to Joseph as well, when his brothers sold him into slavery. There were a couple of verses that popped up that I really wanted to share with y'all. Because I remember one time, me and some friends were going out, and we were witnessing. And we came across a young man who, he didn't want to hear anything we had to say to him. He didn't want to hear it. He said, I don't want to hear anything about God. I don't believe in God. He said, and if I can recall correctly, he said, I think it was like one of his, like a young daughter was killed by I think his daughter's mom's, like her new boyfriend or something like that. And the last thing he wanted to hear was us preaching at him. And that was like the very first conversation we had of the day. And you're talking about like a conversation stopper typically. But the spirit was moving, truly moving, because we managed to share with him the gospel. And one of the brothers I was with at the time, he brought up this verse here in 2 Samuel. after when the Lord punished King David for what he did, having Uriah killed and sleeping with Bathsheba, and part of that punishment was him losing his child. And as we read on here in verse, let's go on verse 18. Verse 18. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 18. On the seventh day, the child died, but David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, "Look, while the child was alive, we spoke to him, and he would not listen to us. So how can we tell him his child is dead? He may even harm himself." When David saw that his servants were whispering to one another, he perceived that the child was dead. So he asked his servants, "Is the child dead?" "He is dead," they replied. Then David got up from the ground, washed and anointed himself, changed his clothes, and went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request, they set foot before him, and he ate. "What is this you have done?" his servants asked. "While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but when he died, you got up and ate." David answered, "While the child was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, 'Who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me, and let him live.' But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." And I was looking at some of the commentators, and many believe that this was King David speaking about him ultimately dying, going to the grave as his son did. And other commentators believe that this is him talking about him seeing his son again in eternity, trusting the love and mercy of God. And I think that's one of the many things we can trust and know as believers, is that God is a good God. He's a merciful God, and we can trust his decisions, even when it's difficult, extremely difficult for us to understand why he allows something so horrendous as this father killing his children. I think God, he clearly has used trauma, tragedy throughout world history, throughout human history, to bring about a tremendous good. For example, the death of Charlie Kirk. How many young people, how many people in general became more inquisitive as to his death and Charlie's Christian biblical worldview and started attending church? I know as a matter of fact that our church was packed after Charlie was killed. All kinds of new faces. People just had questions and they wanted to know. And the world can't answer those questions. The world cannot. And it put these individuals in a position where they knew the only place that they can go was to ask a godly man or woman. And I pray that many of them did. And then we're even hearing about a boom when it comes down to the young people becoming more godly, more biblical, entering into church, especially young men. Not a prime example. And lastly, I want to share with y'all one more thing I want to share with y'all one more thing, that in times like these, I think when we're backs are against the wall and we just don't know what's going on, I think it's good to ask questions. But let me just read a little bit from Proverbs 3. I'll start with verse 1. "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man." And here's the main verse that I really want y'all to hear and understand and truly take to heart. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. It goes on to say, and I'm just adding this because I just always love this. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Friends, I appreciate y'all for joining me today. Sad episode, sad discussion, but there's a lot. As I said earlier on, there's a lot that we can learn and we can gain. And if you're in a situation like this, where you're in an abusive situation, ask for help. Basically, every community, every city has some type of domestic violence protection or shelter. Do what you have to do to get yourself out of this situation, because odds are there's going to be somebody, depending on how many people watch this video, but odds are there's going to be somebody who knows of someone or someone who might be in a situation like this themselves. And I don't want to be hearing about anyone having to go through any situation like this. So if this is you, ask for help. Call 911, send a message to a friend. See if you are afraid to reach out yourself, have someone do it for you. But there is help out there. Your pastor at a church, there are people that can help you. So I appreciate y'all for joining me. And as always, stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation. Take care.